Hello.
Hello, Mr. Ryder. Thank you that you agreed to our interview for Kabar News Agency. As we know, the International Labour Organization hosted the Global Forum for Human-Centered Recovery, which has ended yesterday. So my question is, how do you assess the results of this Global Forum convened to discuss the international community's response to the COVID-19 crisis?
Well, thank you very much. Firstly, thank you for the opportunity to speak. Let me begin by just explaining the idea of our forum. What we wanted to do was to bring together heads of government, heads of state, bring together them with heads of international organizations. So we had the International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization, and many others, and the representatives of governments, employers, in a conversation about how we are going to recover from the terrible crisis that COVID-19 has brought. Now, COVID-19, of course, has been a health crisis, but it's become a global economic and social crisis as well. Our estimate is that the impact of COVID on jobs and on incomes has been 4 times more serious than what happened with the financial crisis of 2008 to 2009. So we need to find a way forward from that. We know that global economy is beginning to grow again. This year, it's about 4.5%. But we need to look behind that aggregate figure to see what's really happening in people's lives, in people's working life in particular. And there the story is not so good. And I'll give you 2 reasons why. Firstly, we see that labor markets are stabilizing at levels of employment considerably below pre-pandemic levels. So labor markets have not recovered to where they were pre-pandemic, and that should be a source of great worry to us. Secondly, we are seeing, frankly, a 2-speed recovery. The rich world is growing back quite quickly, bouncing back quite quickly. Why? Because they have the fiscal resources to invest in recovery, but also because they're able to vaccinate more of their populations. And this is a precondition for reopening their economies. So the danger is a 2-speed and incomplete recovery, and one which, to go straight to one of the major themes of the forum, is likely to make inequality in the world worse than before. And already inequality was very serious. So our forum was intended to bring people together to discuss how to promote what we call a human-centered recovery that would address these very, very serious problems. And the point here is we need international policy coherence. We need to bring together health policy, labor policy, financial policy, trade policy, and integrate them. Because if we try to deal with the recovery in isolated silos, as we say, we are unlikely to come up with the right solutions. So our forum, I think, was very important for bringing these people together. The objective was not to adopt a declaration, not to adopt conclusions, but to lay a platform for greater coherence and greater cooperation between these different parts of the policy spectrum to promote the type of recovery we want to see.
My next question is, what lies at the core of ILO's efforts to improve the situation in the world of work as well in the social field?
We have many challenges. It comes together in this human-centered recovery, but perhaps I could point to one challenge which is particularly important, which is a question of social protection. We know that today in the world, the majority of people do not have any social protection, zero social protection. 53% of working people have no social protection. And we've seen what the consequences of that is during the pandemic. When a crisis happens, when you lose your job or cannot work, you lose your income, if there's no social protection, you're on your own, you're in deep trouble. So we believe that one of the major challenges for the years ahead must be to not only increase levels of social protection, both in coverage and the adequacy of social protection. The protection must be sufficient to protect people. We have to move to universal social protection. The human cost of a world in which less than half of the population has social protection is horrific, and we've seen it. And perhaps I can just add to that, because it's closely related, the problems of informal employment. 60%, 6 out of 10 working people work in informality. No labor laws and mostly no social protection. For many years, the ILO has been arguing for formalizing informal employment so that people are able to enjoy the basics, just the basics of protection at work. And we've made some progress. There has been some progress, but I'm worried that with the pandemic, that progress is being reversed. So we have to pay attention once more to formalizing informality at work.
Mm-hmm. And considering the growing migration flows worldwide, what measures is the ILO taking to protect the migrant workers' rights and their working conditions?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I know that in your country and neighboring countries, this is a very important issue. Let me say to begin with that I think migration is, or at least can be, a very positive part of our societies and our global economy. It can be, on two conditions. The first condition is that migration is not an obligation, but a choice. The first option must always be to try to create decent jobs at home, so that migration is not simply a strategy for those who have no better option. Unfortunately, many people are more or less obliged to migrate to have a decent life, sometimes to escape conflict and repression. So make migration a choice. And secondly, where migration does take place, it needs to take place in conditions of respect for the right of the migrant and their families. And that means, as a basic principle here, that means applying to migrant workers the principle of equal treatment. There is no reason why migrants should be less favorably treated at work than local workers. Unfortunately, that is not always the reality. We know that migrants are subjected to abusive treatment, discrimination. We know, in addition, and I regret this profoundly, that often there is a stigma, there is a hostility towards migrants. This also we need to combat. Now, what are we doing about that? Well, we're working hard with our member states to try to create, firstly, legal pathways for migration, where migration is undertaken on a regular basis with proper documentation in an orderly way. Then the protections for those people are much more likely to be effective. Where there is irregular migration, clandestine migration, we know that this often opens the doors to abuse. So orderly, regularly migration, applying the principle of non-discrimination and equal treatment. We are working also to establish bilateral migration agreements between sending and receiving countries. And in this way, we believe progress can be made. I'm in the International Labour Organization here in Geneva. Across the road is the International Organization of Migration, our friends who are working also in this area. And we're working together to try to apply the Global Compact on safe, orderly and regular migration adopted by the United Nations 4 years ago. This is a blueprint, a global blueprint to make migration the positive experience and the positive contribution to the global economy that it should be.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Ryder, what do you think? What occupations can disappear or have already disappeared due to the pandemic? And what new occupations or professions can emerge in the world for migrant workers in the present context?
Well, I think what we have to understand is that even before the pandemic arrived, the world of work was changing and changing very, very quickly. We talk about transformative change in the world of work. And that's always been the case. But perhaps in recent years, we've seen change happening more quickly and more profoundly than in the past, particularly, not exclusively, particularly because of technological change, digitalization of the world of work. I think the pandemic has accelerated that change. It didn't create it, it's accelerated that change. And so we know, we're seeing the creation of many jobs and many professions which are related to digital skills, to information technology and artificial intelligence. And we talk a lot about all of that. So these are certainly some of the jobs of the future. But let me point to two other areas where I think we're going to see more jobs in the future. One is in the health and care economy. Now, the pandemic has made us very, very aware of the importance of healthcare. But around the world, there is a global shortage of health workers, health employees, a global shortage, partly because countries are not investing enough in their health services. And broadly, the notion of care is important. All of our societies are confronted with the challenges of providing adequate care for children, for older people. Now, very often, this is done on an unpaid basis, privately at home, often by women. And we believe there is a need to professionalize the care economy, to upgrade jobs in the care economy, to recognize the economic contribution of care. It would be, by the way, one very good way of improving the status of women in the labor market. So that's another area. And the third area I want to mention, I could talk about others, but the third area I want to mention is in respect of the green economy of the future. You know, we're all aware of the challenges of climate change. I think we all understand today that climate change is created by human activity. And the reality is that nearly all of that human activity is work or work related. So we have to redesign work and labor markets as we move towards climate neutrality. And this means, by definition, and it won't be a choice, it will be an obligation, we have to create the green jobs of the future. Now, they can be very diverse. They could be in construction, they could be in transport, they could be in specialized environmental sciences. But the green economy of the future, together with the care economy and the digital economy, are going to be, I think, some of the main determinants of the jobs of the future.
Okay, thank you. And the last question is about the situation in Central Asia. More than 7 million migrant workers from Central Asia are currently of their home countries, and not all of them are happy with their situation. Among others, more than 1 million migrants from Kyrgyzstan are now working worldwide. How do you assess the migration situation in Central Asia, including Kyrgyzstan? And does the ILO have any plans to address the problems of migrant workers?
Firstly, I fully appreciate the significance of migration to the economies and the societies of Kyrgyzstan, and indeed some of your neighboring republics. I think of Tajikistan as well. We know that very large numbers of your citizens go to other countries to work. And that takes me back to my point I previously made. This is good if it is a free choice made by the people. It is less good if it is an obligation because there are no job opportunities at home. And I suspect, given the magnitude of migration, some of this could be regarded as forced migration, and that is not good. That said, it's important as well to recognize that migration is vitally important for your society and your economy. I think that the money sent back to your country by migrants approaches something like 30% of your national income. So this is not a detail, this is not a minority thing, this is a very important thing. So we want to make sure that where migration occupies this so important part in your national economy, it is undertaken in satisfactory conditions. And that brings me back to some of the things I've already said to you about equal treatment, fair treatment, and legal regular pathways for migration. Now, what are we doing to try and help on all of this? Well, out of our office in Moscow, which covers your country, we're working on migration systems, firstly, to make sure that migration is undertaken in full knowledge. I think informing migrants of the realities and their rights is the first step in ensuring fair treatment. We're working on the capacity of different governments to monitor and to accompany migration processes so that they are in a position to support their citizens who make the decision to migrate. And this is the other side of the equation, we need to, and we are working with your country and with neighboring republics to try to stimulate employment at home as well, so that migration is not an obligation. These are, I'm not going to hide it, extremely important challenges. Sometimes I think they're decisive challenges for countries like yours, and we will do our very best to meet the expectations of our friends in Kyrgyzstan to provide the support that you want and that you need.
Mr. Ryder, thank you for your interesting interview and for your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My pleasure. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.